What was your idea coming here to Bogota? What are you looking for?
Well, I'm an urbanist, and I like to see, what's going on in different cities. And here in Colombia, Medellin, Bogota, I remember a bit of Cali, and so I thought it would be interesting to, come and see what's happening. There's a lot of energy here in Bogota, which is really remarkable, really, given what the history has been. And so it's very exciting to be here.
What do you think about this kind of project, building with the scarce, with the least possible? Because as we were talking about this space, this is building really with. Do you think this is an important part of some kind of project like this?
Yeah, I think it's necessary. I think obviously social structures need to be built from the bottom up, and one of the ways of doing it is through, collective enterprises of various kinds. So if a group like yours could be a catalyst for bringing stuff together, I think that's a very, very important, first step in changing the political culture of a country. And I think this is it's a marvelous thing that you guys are doing.
So like we do this in a kind of scale, like this is a almost one-to-one, person-to-person scale.
Yeah.
Do you think this is something that could be done in another kind of scale, or how is it scalable in another manner?
Well, I think one of the most difficult things politically is what we geographers refer to as jumping scale. How do you move from doing this kind of work in this kind of locality to dealing with the whole metropolitan region? And how does this relate to what's going on in the whole metropolitan region? But what I think is interesting is that if you start to have a network of places like this around in the metropolitan region, there can be forms of communication that can go on so that you don't get the kind of competition that often goes on between communities and between neighborhoods for resources. And you can start to imagine a collective mechanism to start to talk about, well, how do we reorganize the whole metropolitan region across what at the moment are terrible, terrible social inequalities and different life chances which exist in one part of this city to what exists in another part of the city. The thing that strikes me always as tragic is that the rich people live in these places and they never go anywhere, and I can't imagine. It's a very boring life, an incredibly boring life.
Sometimes foreign people come, they only see the chaos of the city, they only see, but we're kind of building from that. Is it a contradiction? When people have all this, they could do all these things, they all have this power, this money in a first world country, but they don't have these kind of communitary spaces?
Look, it takes a little chaos to actually do anything. So I kind of think chaos is not a bad thing. I think a certain amount of chaos, total chaos is a bad thing, but a certain level of chaos can be a sort of seed ground for, doing different and innovative things. Things come together accidentally. People meet who otherwise might not meet. That's what makes urban life so interesting, and why in those kind of bourgeois closed gated communities life is so boring, because they never meet anybody different from themselves, and this is rather tragic, I think. So we should try and emancipate and liberate the bourgeois neighborhoods from their boredom.
But they're always getting they get this comfort zone every time, like more and more. I mean, do you see a kind of way that this gap between this kind of living in these gated communities that you talk about and this kind of, is there a way to link them, or is it impossible? Or?
You know, I am not quite sure how to think about that and what to do about that. I think it's one of the great ironies that I always remember Ronald Reagan saying to the Soviets about the wall, saying, "Tear down this wall, Mr. Gorbachev." And I felt like standing in the city like Guayaquil, which has all of these gated communities, and say, "Tear down these walls, you people." So we tear down certain political walls, which are barriers to free trade, but then we erect all these other walls that actually seal everybody off so nobody can see what anybody else is doing. And I just think the irrationality of that is something that we really have to emphasize. But how to persuade, you know, these crazy rich people who want to go live behind gated communities and sort of almost, they put themselves in prisons. And you kind of say, why don't you get out of prison? And it's a kind of a very big challenge, I think, to sort of start to make that argument.
When you live in these gated communities, you're looking for permanency in your life, and I think here we're really living a different experience.
Yeah.
But it's on time. It has a time. Maybe it will last a month, maybe a year.
Yeah.
But we're not counting on it being permanent. You know.
Right. Well, you know, you kind of ask what kind of, you know, is life a process or is it a static thing? And life always seems to me about, well, it's a process. And the process is always moving and it's always changing and it's always dynamic. You know, why do people have to try to somehow or other shut that all off? And shut off change and get upset by chaos. I mean, I don't like chaotic traffic, I have to say, and sitting in a chaotic traffic jam for 3 hours is not my idea of fun, but that's what I mean about certain kinds of forms of chaos are good and some not so good. But then you sort of say, well, why are we living in a society where everybody has to have an automobile, where one of the main drivers of capital accumulation is the automobile and everything that goes with it, the highways and the lifestyle and everything else? Why don't we think of something different? And you know, on a day like today in Bogota, you see people cycling around and you kind of say, well, maybe it should be like that all the time. And why not? I mean, it's perfectly possible. I think some of those innovations, like you see in Bogota, you see in Quito, which is on, you know, Sundays, you shut off large pieces of the city and everybody takes over the highways and they become people places instead of car places. I think that's a very nice thing to have started. It changes, I think, people's mentality of who belongs in what space of the city at what time, and I think starts to generate some shifts and changes. So there are even minor changes of that sort that seem to me can have sometimes quite profound ideological effects. Somebody said to me the other day that neoliberalism has trained us to be cynical, so that we don't believe anything significant can really happen and that we can't do anything significant with our lives. And I think that neoliberalism has been profoundly alienating, so that people live in an alienated kind of way. And alienation is a state of, in a way, of hopelessness. And I think breaking out of that, and we see many tendencies now, people seeking to break out of it. Breaking out of it is one of the things that is beginning, I think, to happen on a widespread scale. I mean, people of your generation, like you, kind of look at the job situation and say, look, this is not very meaningful. I can't have a meaningful job. How can I construct a meaningful life? and doing things like this is meaningful, and good comradeship, and, you know, arguments as well. You know, I'm sure it's not all peaceful, but that's good, because conflict is okay. So, you know,
this is the job. Like, this is a job, but we're not always, what we don't get is monetary.
Right.
It's more we're looking about relationships and investigating, trying to find new ways of relationships.
Yeah, I mean, you know, there's an attempt to create an unalienated life.
Exactly.
In a society that's profoundly alienating. And that conflict, I think, is beginning to surge in all sorts of ways. And I think there's an increasing, actually, there's not a thought that's original to me, but David Graeber wrote a piece in which he said, I think what we're beginning to see is an alliance between the unalienated, the people who managed to do something like that, and the oppressed. And that's a very interesting way of looking at it. And I think that the fact that you're in here in this community, which is a marginalized community, and you're not building this for you know, there is an alliance of a certain sort between the unalienated and the oppressed. And I think that actually, I've been sort of perplexed, I think, over a lot of the progressive thinking these days comes out of what you might call I don't know, cultural producers, you know, people who are involved in small art projects, or in your case, architectural projects, or you know, poetry readings, or whatever. There's a very strong kind of movement, I think, of a search for meaning. And unfortunately, we're also seeing that search for meaning captured by, you know, the new power of religion in society. Where we got the evangelicals back here and the Pentecostals doing that. Your rivals back here, you know. It's also being captured by the right wing. I mean, that's what the fascists offer, is a sense of meaning, which. So I think that this is one of the big struggles that's going on.
Yeah, we're in the
underground.
same business as them.
Yeah.
Searching for.
Yeah, well, and that's why you know, it's good you're colonizing breakdancing and rap music and all these things, because it's better than that music.
Algo aquí precavidos andamos porque ya nos están estigmatizando. Como es que ocultan las voces de los que llevamos aquí el mando. Ya no nos dejamos, los niños cada vez más fuerte crecen y comprenden cuál es la realidad. Que se debe consumir, que es lo que se debe vivir, que es lo que se debe ofrecer, que es lo que se puede aquí ya construir, que es lo que empieza a crecer. La gente pasa y de pronto no entiende, aquí nuevo el presente es algo comunal. Todas las personas que han puesto un poco, un grano y no la maldad, se viene a invitar aquí. Ya es como es que nos vamos a reunir con el compañero de El Pi, con el compañero de El Pi, golpe de barrio también aquí. Siempre